We're back with another episode of the Filmaholic. Tonight we're talking about the overall state of Star Wars and our opinion on it. We're gonna go back from the beginning and work our way up and just give some thoughts. So let's start with the original trilogy, right? So the original trilogy comes out. It's generally loved by everyone. You know, some people have problems with Return of the Jedi, what have you, Ewoks. Can't really speak too much on that because I wasn't alive during that period, but to me, the original trilogy is a masterpiece. Every film's perfect. Empire is obviously the best, but I love all of them. So after the original trilogy, their books started to come out, right? And I want to make this clear because I think a lot of people are confused about this, and I know there's a lot of fans of the old EU books, but none of that was ever canon by George Lucas, okay? Like, George Lucas let that stuff be made, and he was okay with it. He wanted people to have this creativity, but never once did he say this stuff was canon. And I think obviously we'll get to this in a bit. When Disney buys Lucasfilm, they get rid of all the EU, as far as it being canon. They officially is not canon, which I think upset a lot of people. But it made sense at the time, right? Because there's so much that's in those canon books that there was no way they could make that canon and move forward with any reasonable film that an audience would want to see. Chewie literally dies in the books. He gets crushed by a moon. Did you want to start episode 7 with that being already happened? Chewie got crushed by a moon. Sorry, we're not gonna, and all the stories would have already happened that we would want to see. The whole Darth Sidious thing, Jaina Solo, all of that would have actually already happened if you just stayed true to the canon book. So I think from the beginning it was smart of Lucasfilm to be like, hey, we're starting fresh with books. Sorry. There it is. So after the original trilogy, after those books came out, the Thrawn books that everyone loves, they moved on to the prequels. George Lucas made the prequels. Obviously, there was a lot of mistakes there from George Lucas. I like the prequels. I think it is really good storytelling and ambitious, but the problem was the execution. George Lucas should have never directed all of those films. I think someone else should have came in to direct. I think someone else should have came in to do rewrites of the screenplays instead of just him writing them. But we have them. A lot of people didn't like the prequels, which ends up leading George Lucas to reconsider owning Star Wars. He made Clone Wars after the prequels with Dave Filoni, but he came up with 7, 8, and 9. He had those ideas. He wrote treatments for them. He wanted to make those films, and from what I gathered, he even considered making those films. But he decided it was best not to. He ends up selling Star Wars to Disney, and this is when Bob Iger comes in. Now, I want to mention that Kathleen Kennedy was hired by George Lucas. I'm pretty sure that she was hired by George Lucas, not Bob Iger. Yeah. So she was from that regimen. She was she came on before the Disney buy.
Yeah. So he hired her because George Lucas trusted her a lot during the Disney purchase.
Right. She had worked with George Lucas on the Indiana Jones movie. Kathleen Kennedy is a legend in Hollywood, and it really makes sense why he chose her to take over Lucasfilm. But we'll get into it a little bit later, but a lot of people blame Kathleen Kennedy for everything to do with the problems that we're going through with Star Wars. And I think that really, she is responsible for some of them because she is the person who runs Lucasfilm. But you need to look beyond her and look at Bob Iger. He's the first person that causes problems here. If you look back, and especially his memoir that came out recently, he talks about this vision he had when he got Star Wars from George Lucas. And he was under the assumption, and I still think he's under the assumption, that everyone hated the prequels. And I don't think he ever understood Star Wars. He just saw money signs, which it makes sense. It's Hollywood. It's a business. But I really think he just messed up. And I hope that he understands that moving forward. But Bob Iger is, from what I've gathered from all the stuff that's came out recently, the person who wanted this original, or this trilogy that we're in now, we just finished, to be just like the original trilogy. I think he's the reason that Force Awakens was so similar to A New Hope. I still love Force Awakens. I think it's great, but I think he was mainly responsible for that. He probably had an influence of JJ getting hired, which I think JJ was a good choice to direct Force Awakens. He wouldn't have been my choice if I'm looking back. I think Jon Favreau should have been hired in the first place. I remember at that point in time when they were looking at directors, the person that came to my mind was Jon Favreau. Look what he did before that. Knew he was a big Star Wars fan, and he had just kicked off the MCU with Iron Man and Iron Man 2.
So we get to, JJ is hired to direct after Spalt. George Lucas had given them treatments for 7, 8, and 9. We know that now. We know that they tossed them aside, didn't want to continue with what he wanted to do, which we know in George Lucas's treatments that it was following a character named Kira,
which was originally Rey's name in the first screenplay for Force Awakens. It was later changed for whatever reason, and Luke was going to still be on an island. He kind of went to a dark place, but we know from concept art it was going to look a lot more like the prequels from what George Lucas wanted to tell. And I think the characters might have been a little bit younger. I think Kira was supposed to be a little bit younger than Rey. Ends up being in the movie. I'm not sure about that. But the first screenwriter's hired as well, Michael Arndt, who wrote Toy Story 3. So he's hired. He's working on the screenplay. He ends up getting let go. Apparently, from what I've read online, it was taking him too long, and they were trying to get that movie out. I think originally Force Awakens was supposed to come out in May and was pushed back to December. I think part of that was because the screenplay was taking too long. I think Michael Arndt had some creative differences from what Bob Iger probably wanted, because we know, and this is from concept art that's in, I'm pretty sure, the visual dictionary of Force Awakens, there was going to be a Force Ghost Anakin in Force Awakens. Now, I'm not 100% in on that Force Ghost idea, because it was supposed to be like half of him was good, half of him was bad, which is kind of weird. I'm not sure if that would have worked, but opposed to not getting a Force Ghost Anakin at all in this trilogy, I think I would have preferred to have seen that. So they let Michael Arndt go. Then it ends up being JJ and Lawrence Kasdan who write the screenplay. Now this goes back to Bob Iger wanted this to be just like the original trilogy, bringing back Lawrence Kasdan. I'm not saying that's a bad thing, because he is a good screenwriter. I'm glad they brought him back for something to do with this new series of Star Wars films. But I'm really curious what Michael Arndt was trying to do with that film, and I wish that one day we would get to see that screenplay. I know we never will, but it's interesting to think about. Around that same time, Gareth Edwards was hired to make Rogue One. Rian Johnson was also hired to direct and write Episode 8, and Josh Trank was hired to make a Boba Fett film. Now, they had the Star Wars Celebration, right? They showed stuff from Force Awakens. They showed stuff from Rogue One. It was like that first early clip, not even that was actually part of the film of Rogue One, getting people excited. And Josh Trank was supposed to show up at Star Wars Celebration to talk about Boba Fett. Doesn't show up. He ends up getting fired. And I think this marks the beginning of problems at Lucasfilm, which, if you look at the reasons, they say rumors why he was fired because of stuff on the Fantastic Four set, all of that. Even if they were just basing off what they had heard, it makes sense with this property to go in a different direction. But what's interesting, and I think this is a problem too, when they let Josh Trank go, that movie got canceled. That movie got pushed back to just the iCloud or something of Lucasfilm. So they had no passion or plans to make that Boba Fett film. It showed, and this is a problem with this whole Lucasfilm thing that they're doing, is they keep hiring directors and they're like, what kind of film do you want to make, or what film do you want to make, instead of saying, hey, this is our plan, these are the movies you should make. So because like we know Lawrence Kasdan wanted to make a Solo movie. I think Solo was actually one of the movies George Lucas wanted to make too, or had like given them an idea for. So, and I think originally that movie Solo was still probably going to get made with Lord and Miller and Kasdan writing, but it was going to be in 2020. They end up switching that with the Boba Fett movie. There's still no Episode 9 director announced yet. I'm pretty sure Colin Trevorrow got announced to direct Episode 9 after Jurassic World sometime in 2015, or maybe it might have been right after Force Awakens. But another interesting thing, too, I have here in my notes is that
it was rumored for a while that Rian Johnson was not only writing and directing Episode 8, he was also going to be writing Episode 9, but just a new director was coming in for that film. Which, looking at this trilogy now, it kind of would have made more sense if he had wrote 9 and a different director had directed it. With the direction his story went, I feel like he needed to finish that story. But
it's one of those moments just like, all right, he did 8. Let's see what he can do from here. Like, well, we're already stuck here. Let's see what he can do.
Yeah. I mean, at least have him write a treatment or an outline or something, and that was another thing too that I've always heard in the past before, the past year or so, was that JJ had written treatments for 7, 8, and 9 of the direction he wanted that story to go. And it was rumored that he gave those treatments to Rian Johnson, and Rian Johnson ignored them. Now, whether or not that's true, I don't know. I tend to believe at this point that that's not true. At the time that I had heard it, I was like, yeah, I think that's true. I think Rian Johnson just said, fuck it, I want to do whatever I want to do. I don't believe that anymore. I think Rian Johnson was pretty much probably told by Kathleen Kennedy and Lucasfilm that he could make whatever he wanted to make, so he did, which I think Colin Trevorrow would have done too, and I think JJ kind of did that when he came back for 9.
You imagine JJ like during that Snoke's death, he probably was like, that son of a bitch.
Yeah, but with Snoke, there's an interesting thing. We don't know what the whole plan for Snoke ever was, and I don't know if JJ ever knew what it was, other than him just like thinking there needed to be an Emperor type character.
I don't know. There's so much stuff that JJ put in Episode 7, and if he didn't really know where the story was going, it's really weird. It's like you just left that for no reason. Like the whole like who was Rey, and there's some stuff coming out recently that state that JJ actually planned for Rey to be a nobody when he made Force Awakens. Apparently, he said that in an interview or something. And if that's the case, I feel like Force Awakens wasn't made to implicate that she was a nobody. In that film, there's definitely moments that try to tease that she is somebody and that certain characters know about her.
Like Han, I feel like his character is supposed to know who Rey is in Force Awakens. I think Kylo is supposed to know of her in Force Awakens. There's just different things that is set up in that movie that I don't think continue into the next one, and it goes back into the fact that there was no overall plan for this trilogy, which we'll get to in a second here. I want to briefly talk about, Episode 7 comes out, it's a success. JJ opens the mystery box about Rey, keeps people guessing, keeps people talking about the franchise for the next couple years. The following year, after Episode 7, we get Rogue One, which is when we first start to see like problems in the making of the films. There was behind-the-scene problems that were rumored. Apparently, Edwards played nice. He didn't get fired from the film, like Phil Lord and Chris Miller ended up getting fired.
But then we get to Episode 8, which this is when I think the glass ball that they had, dropped and shattered. Not in terms of 8 being a bad movie. I think 8's a really good movie.
It was the last film that I remember and although I really like Solo and Rise of Skywalker in particular, like when I went to see it in a crowd of people, and I think we were talking about this before, you didn't feel the same energy that you felt with Episode 7, 8, and Rogue One. There was just a different energy in the crowd. And I'm not sure if this was completely Rian Johnson's storytelling, if people just weren't feeling what the direction that Luke went. Personally, I don't think all of that was bad. You know, I have problems with The Last Jedi. I have problems with the Rose and Finn storyline. I have a problem with the humor, especially him tossing the lightsaber, different stuff like that. I think Rian Johnson's a big fan of Star Wars. I don't think he completely understands it, but I don't think any of the people making the movies right now completely understand Star Wars. Like George Lucas or somebody who I think should make Star Wars, you know, would understand it. There's different stuff with the timeline that doesn't work with The Last Jedi for me, and this is something else I think we were talking about where...
Well, I know I mentioned it earlier too in my Rise of Skywalker review. They wanted to treat this trilogy like it was the original trilogy, and not just in story beats, but they wanted different things. Like, for example, in this film, or in The Last Jedi, right? It takes place right after Force Awakens, which I think was a mistake. I think there should have been a time jump. But it takes place right after Force Awakens, and no one really kind of... I mean, Han's death is definitely mentioned. It's a big thing in the film. But there's no funeral for him. There's no, like, really mourning of him from Leia, which is a problem for me. And I know Rian Johnson, one of his comments was that in the original film, in A New Hope, Kenobi dies and they move on very quickly. But that's not the same situation, you know. First of all, when we got A New Hope, Kenobi was a new character to us. It wasn't like Han Solo, where we'd spent all of this time and years with Han Solo. The characters weren't really attached to Kenobi as like Han was to these characters. I mean, Leia was his wife. It's just a different situation. I know the Snoke thing's an issue too, where he's talked about Snoke and how...
In the original trilogy, you really didn't get much backstory on Emperor Palpatine. You just knew that he was bad, and you didn't get his backstory until the prequels. So he kind of used that for Snoke in this one, where he really didn't care or find it necessary what Snoke's backstory was or how he seduced Ben to the dark side. But that just doesn't work for this trilogy, you know. Like, this is the 8th movie in the franchise. There's so much that came before it. You can't just leave out minor details or big major details like that, like they're minor.
And I think this was the moment we really saw, especially with the death of Snoke and all of this, that there was no plan from Lucasfilm for this trilogy. They were just letting each director do what they wanted to do. It made me really nervous for 9, even though I was so excited for it. It made me nervous. Any thoughts?
I don't know. Like, I think I would prefer Rian Johnson just to direct episode 9, to be honest.
Yeah.
Like, it's just like, yeah, I guess, like, I don't know, I kind of still find it funny that he killed off, though, because, like, can you imagine, man, like, making videos, like, for 2 years, and, like, doing, like, Who is Snoke, and, like, doing, like, all these, like, what he could be and all that, until I find out he got killed, like, a fucking piñata.
Yeah, I don't like it.
Don't
get me wrong. I love the I
funny.
love the scene. The scene's awesome, and I love that Kylo kills him. You know, like, it was an amazing moment in Star Wars, but I wish that moment had been in Episode 9 instead.
So another thing is that the canon has pretty much been ignored, right? So, like, when I mentioned earlier, when Lucasfilm bought, or not Lucasfilm, when Disney bought Lucasfilm, they wiped away the EU books. They started saying, we're going to make these new novels, these new comics, these new stories, and everything from this point forward is going to be canon. So, you know, the first book that they put, or the first big book they put out in terms of Journey to the Force Awakens, as they were calling it at the time, was Aftermath. And then they turned into an Aftermath trilogy, which I read, and I like a lot of people got invested in that and like what it set up for the future of Star Wars and these different possibilities. You know, stuff happening on Jakku, the rise of the First Order, the end of the Empire. all this really cool, kind of like interesting stuff that they set up for these new movies.
And they now just ignore it. Like, all of that is just not even at all referenced in the new trilogy, other than Snap Wexley appearing in 7 and 9, who dies in 9, by the way. They killed his character. But it's just really like, especially the stuff on Jakku, you know, that's like the planet race from Palpatine had like this big like fascination with Jakku and was like putting like all the stuff together on that planet. Ties into nothing. There's also the Bloodline book, which is one of my favorites of the new canon. It's about Leia. In that story, she's running for like the Mon Mothma type position, and she ends up losing her political career essentially because it's revealed that she's the daughter of Vader. Up until this point in the timeline, which is 6 years before Force Awakens, no one knows that she is the daughter of Vader or that Luke is the son of Vader, because they know I think the galaxy knows that her and Luke are brother and sister, but they don't know that they're the kids of Vader. And Ben didn't know this either. Han does, but not Ben. So you got to think about how this affects Ben at this point. You know, he's at that point he's 23, he's training with Luke, and then he finds out that Darth Vader is his grandfather. I don't know why that wasn't Episode 7. Like, I really think, like, looking back, I've been here recently thinking about like what I would have done with this trilogy, and I really think Episode 7 should have been Luke and Ben as Jedi, the New Order. We should have seen all of that. We should have seen this political scandal with Leia, and ultimately, Episode 7 should have ended with Ben going to the dark side. But we didn't get that. I think Force Awakens would have been a good Episode 8, and then Episode 8 would have been a better Episode 9, which would have ended with the two Jedi orders. Like, you know, you have Rey leading the normal Jedi, Kylo leading the gray Jedi. I think that's how and then creating balance in the Force. I think that was how this saga should have ended. We didn't get that. I also want to throw out the Phasma novel, which was written, and I read it before. Yeah, it was before The Last Jedi. And it adds to one scene in The Last Jedi when she gets the crack in her mask and you see her face. It adds to that scene once you've read the novel, but other than that, nothing. They didn't really care about that at all. You know, after Episode 8, we get to Solo, right? And we were talking about that earlier. It was the first film that I went to, and it was still like a sold-out theater when I saw Solo opening night. And people seemed excited, but it just didn't feel like the same energy that I'd felt in the last 3 films. Solo was the first box office failure. It still made a good amount of money, but overall it was a box office failure for Lucasfilm compared to their other movies.
Man, dude, it was like a month like after Infinity War, then a couple of weeks after Deadpool.
Right. This was huge problems in general. Like
by that point, it's like honestly, I think I was burned out by that point.
The movie should have never came out in May. Like if you had put Force Awakens in May, I would have understood it because every Star Wars film before that had came out in May. But now you had 3 Star Wars films in the last 3 years that came out in December. December is your ground now. That's where Star Wars should be. Instead, you tried to put Solo back in May for whatever reason. And it's competing with Infinity War, Disney's own property. It makes no sense. And like you said, you also had Deadpool coming right after that. Not only was the release date an issue, which was Bob Iger's fault too, and he's admitted to that, where he's the one that wanted it to stay on that May date, because Lucasfilm, I think Kathleen Kennedy was pushing to push that movie back to December, which if Solo had came out in December, it would have been a success, I think. Like, it may have gotten some mixed reviews or whatever, but I think it would have been a success. What's up?
Like, can you imagine if like Solo went up against Aquaman that year?
It would have been interesting, because Solo is a much better film than Aquaman.
I think it would have been like what happened with Jumanji in The Last Jedi when they were going like neck and neck.
Yeah.
I think that would have happened.
I mean, I think it's possible. Yeah. I still think Aquaman would have made a lot of money because people liked it for whatever reason. But Solo should have came out. We'll save the DC stuff for later.
Yeah.
But let's look at the other factors of Solo too, right? So marketing was also an issue. We didn't get the first trailer for Solo until the Super Bowl, which was in February, right, that year?
Yeah, the Super Bowl trailer.
I think that was a little, and they did that partly, I think, because of The Last Jedi coming out in December. Really, Solo, the first trailer for Solo should have came out in December. It probably should have been a tag on to the end of Last Jedi. It wasn't. So I think the trailers and the marketing was a mistake for Solo. You also have the behind the scenes stuff it was widely known. So people knew there was problems with the filming. People knew the directors had been fired. Ron Howard came in to save the film. And let's talk about that too, because that's another issue with all of these films. So Phil Lord and Chris Miller is hired to direct Solo originally. I don't think they should have ever been hired to direct Solo. I like them. I've liked almost every film that I've seen of theirs, but nothing from their movies tell me that they should have made a Solo movie. You know, if I'm looking at people, I was trying to think of that too the other day. I was like, if I was looking at the people to direct a Solo movie, who would I have went after? I would have probably went after Matthew Vaughn, but because I feel like he could capture that humor but also stay with style and everything. They just, and then there's reports that came out that like they were trying to make the film extra funny. It felt like Ace Ventura.
I think they were encouraging improv.
Yes, they were, which Lawrence Kasdan had a big problem with, right? So, hearing all those things, I do think it was the right decision to let Phil Lord and Chris Miller go. I don't think they were the right people to make that film. But it opens the door to a larger problem is that, and I think this goes mainly to Kathleen Kennedy, most of the directors that were picked for these films were like hot names, right? So JJ was the first one, which I think JJ and Rian Johnson are like the little bit different situation. But JJ, if you look at it, he had around the time that he was picked to direct Episode 7, he had Star Trek Into Darkness coming out. Big film, made a lot of money. But also Spielberg recommended him. He's kind of a different situation, like for that first film. Then you move on to Gareth Edwards. Look at when he was picked. He had just made Godzilla. Big blockbuster at the time. Then you look at Rian Johnson. That's the only thing that I'm like a little confused on because I guess he was picked not long after Looper, but Looper I feel like Rian Johnson was actually picked because he was a good director, like genuinely a good director, and like they recognized that and they wanted him to make a Star Wars film. So that's a little bit different. But then they picked Phil Lord and Chris Miller, another hot name at the time, right? They had the 21 Jump Street movies, Cloudy with a Chance of Meatballs, the Lego movie. They had all of these at the time that they were like, oh, it's a hot name. Let's throw them in a Solo movie. Or like, let's throw them in and see what they wanted to direct, and then maybe they said Solo. Same thing with Josh Trank. Look, he was hired. He had just made, what was it? He had just made Chronicle and was making Fantastic Four when they picked him to make the Boba Fett movie. Look at Colin Trevorrow. They picked him right after Jurassic World came out, one of the biggest moneymakers of all time. Look at directors after that, right? The Game of Thrones guys. Game of Thrones is huge. Let's put them in let's give them a Star Wars movie to make. Who's next? It's just whatever name is hot at the moment, and they're like, oh, let's get them and see whatever they want to make, and we'll let them make it. Instead of, let's come up with a plan, let's pick directors that fit that plan, and let's execute that plan.
You know who would have done? I think what I think would make it like a good Solo movie.
Who?
Taika Waititi.
Oh, I agree.
he would have
He would've made
captured
it
the
excellent.
humor. He would have captured the humor, but also like the sad human of it, like basically like his life, how rough his life was before he became the smuggler that we all know and love.
Yeah.
Like he just knows how to mix that like the sadness with the humor really well.
I also think that if they ever made a Crimson Dawn movie with Kira and Maul, which I think that's more likely if we ever do get to see it, and I hope we do. I think that's more likely it'll be a show on Disney Plus than a movie. We're definitely not getting a movie, but I think if Taika came in and directed that film, it'd be really cool. Seeing what Taika would do with the character of Kira and Maul, and then the stuff that's around them at the time, like bounty hunters and all that. I think you could do something really special with it.
One thing I also want to see them. Well, I don't know if you have that in your notes or anything, but one thing I want to see them like Star Wars, pretty much as a whole try out is try different genres. Like try and do like a horror, see if that can work. If it doesn't work, it doesn't work. But I think it's a risk people will appreciate.
Well, I'm about to get into another thing too here, but I feel like they started trying to do that with the anthology films, with the Star Wars story films. Like if you look at Rogue One, at the time they were trying to say Rogue One was a war film, right? And then Solo was supposed to be a Western of sorts. So I think they could have continued that trend and made more stylized films, but after Solo, after what happened as far as the box office goes with Solo and everything, they canceled all of the other Star Wars stories, right? So we know there was a Kenobi movie in development. Stephen Daldry was supposed to direct. We know that now officially because they've talked about it, and Ewan McGregor's talked about it, that he was attached to all this, and they had written screenplays. The guy who wrote Drive is actually doing the show now. He's writing the show. Deborah Chow's directing. But they're taking the script that was for the movie and they converted it into a series. So that movie was canceled. There was a Boba Fett movie that was supposed to be announced like right after Solo. It got canceled. It was James Mangold going to direct it. I think I've read that there was a Mos Eisley movie in development, which may have been like a Solo 2 sort of story. We know that there was going to be some continuation of Solo, whether that be the Mos Eisley movie or whether that be Kira and the Maul storyline, whatever. But all of that got canceled, which is just disappointing. Like, you can take a step back and reevaluate without be like, yeah, we're just gonna cancel all of this. Like, you only made 2 Star Wars story films before you gave up, and only one of them didn't succeed. And instead of looking at why it didn't succeed, you just cancel everything.
I'm trying to look someone right now. You're like pop a name. But you ever seen the Robot Chicken specials, right?
It's been a while. I watched them when I was younger.
I'm not throwing a name in there. I'm just throwing a name in the hat. Seth Green.
What about Seth Green?
He's seen him ever doing anything for Star Wars down the line.
He's
Whether
what?
as a writer, like as a writer or director, Seth Green.
You want to see that?
Yeah. I checked his credentials, it's mostly a bunch of Robot Chicken stuff, but I want to see him. He's a big fan. But I'm not saying just because you're a big fan, like, you should get a job and stuff. I mean, I don't least like walk into the office and pitch an idea.
Yeah. I mean, yeah. I mean, like, I don't know. I would have to look and see what Seth Green has done. If he has, I know he created Robot Chicken, but I don't know. Like, I'd have to see what else he's written and stuff.
The Mandalorian's announced, I think, not long after these films are canceled, which we get to somebody in their vision. Jon Favreau comes in, right? And he has wanted to make these Mandalorian stories for a very long time. I think he's had these ideas in his head for years, he said. Now, personally, I think The Mandalorian was originally in Favreau's script supposed to be a Boba Fett show. Uh, I don't know if that's true or not. I just think that's probably what Favreau wanted to tell, and Lucasfilm was like at the time, "Hey, no, we're trying to make a Boba Fett movie. Let's not do that. Let's do something different." And plus, he was friends with Dave Filoni. He'd worked with Dave Filoni on Rebels, and I think Dave Filoni tried to like set him straight with the history of Mandalorians and whatnot, and that Boba Fett didn't really probably fit with the story he was trying to tell. So we get Mandalorian before Rise of Skywalker, because there was that kind of year and a half break between Solo and Rise of Skywalker, and also during that time that we have a couple other shows announced. Right, we get the Cassian Andor show announced first.
I still don't really understand why we're getting that show, why it was announced, but we'll see. I like Rogue One more now than I did actually when I first saw it. But my main complaint about Rogue One is that I don't really love the characters in it. There's nothing wrong with Cassian Andor. It's just like, I don't know, just like nothing really excited me about the character or any of the rebels, I guess, that died in the film at the end.
That's what I liked about it. I actually like the character.
You liked what?
Like, that's one of the aspects I liked about Rogue One. It's like, just like think about it, man. Like, it's just like during war, like pretty much like we have no time to get to know each other. We're gonna go on like suicide mission. It's just like, come on, like we can't be friends. Or what? Like how long has it been around the time since the Empire been around?
At that point?
Yeah,
19 years. 19 years.
19 years. Oh yeah.
It takes place in the same year as
Yeah,
New Hope, and that was 19 years
okay,
after.
yeah. It's like, dude, it's like 19 years, and then you're like, you might, this is probably the best chance to get rid of the Empire. Of course, you're not going to get the time like to get to know each other. Probably going to show glimpses of how you really are as a person, but it's like come on, you have a mission to do.
Yeah. And
So
I mean, I think that's what they were trying to do. It's just, I don't know, compared to the other films, I'm more about character than I am plot, for my personal opinion. So I guess that's what that affected me. I do think this show, yeah, I do think this show is gonna add more to Rogue One. So like we watch this show and then we watch Rogue One afterwards, we're gonna feel even more for that character. It's just, this show was announced after Mandalorian as the second show. It was announced before Kenobi, and my thought at the time was like, are you serious? We're getting this show instead of a Kenobi show or whatever else. Like all these other characters in Star Wars that I found more interesting. Whatever. I'm kind of worried about the show now, Cassian Andor, because I haven't heard any movement about it. Have you?
I think it's still pre-production.
Like the last thing that I think heard about it was at Star Wars Celebration, Diego Luna and Alan Tudyk came out on stage and like talked. But I would think that show's coming out this year, right? But I don't think it is. I think it's not coming out until 2021.
I think right now with all the current mess, I think they're just trying to keep everything to the rug right now.
Maybe I would like them to like just surprise drop it, but
I mean, they might probably be secretly filming it right now. Just Diego Luna, like, I think he's filming the second season of Narcos Mexico. Because I know he has a show for Narcos on Netflix.
Well, have you not started filming Cassian Andor yet?
Or
whatever the show's called. Have we even got a title?
Cassian Andor, a Star Wars story.
A Star Wars series.
Yeah, same thing, just with chapters.
I don't know. So all that happens. Oh, I left out to one thing that Colin Trevorrow was fired, and I think it was like around the time that he had that movie come out that bombed. I don't really know if that had much to do with it. I feel like it was just he wanted to go in a different direction, and it was also them course correcting because some people didn't like The Last Jedi, and they were like, what do we do? Let's just bring JJ back. Force Awakens was successful. People seem to like that. Let's bring JJ back. Which at the time I was really excited because I love Force Awakens. So hearing that
I
JJ
was like, why? Why?
Some people were. I was really excited. And now I feel differently because I just don't think it was that good of a decision to bring him back at this point. Also, let's not forget too. And I think this was before The Last Jedi, but it's still a thing. The Rian Johnson trilogy was announced, right? That he was making a trilogy unrelated to any of the characters that we already knew, and I think it's supposed to be in a different time period, maybe as well. And there's been no movement on that. He's talked about it in interviews that it's still happening. I think the last time they talked about it was more recently on the Knives Out set or the press tour, and he said that he was still planning on making them, but they were still getting things in order over at Lucasfilm, and if he made another film before then, what's that?
Why can't him bring in Chris Evans and Daniel Craig in this?
I don't think that trilogy's happening. I think it'll get canceled, or if they're just not going to talk about it anymore, and people are going to be like, "What happened to that trilogy?" And they're just going to be like, "What trilogy?"
Right after the Rian Johnson trilogy was announced is when they also came forward and announced like the Game of Thrones guys was coming aboard, and they were making their own trilogy. It was called a trilogy, I think at the time that at first it was called a series. It was going to be a series of films created by the Game of Thrones guys, and they were going to be writing it and I think producing it, and they were going to have probably different people come in to direct it, right? So then, and it went from that to a trilogy, and then it went from a trilogy to, the Game of Thrones guys, they're going to write the first film, and they may say on to direct or produce a couple more after that, but they're not making the whole trilogy. And then it went to, they're gone, bye.
Netflix giving them a bigger check.
Do you think that was their decision? Do you think it was a mutual decision between Lucasfilm and the Game of Thrones guys?
Okay, so the thing was, I think Netflix offered them more money, and they were just like, screw that. But I think Loki, I think I'm with you. I think it was a mutual thing. I think.
Oh, that's just what they said. They said it was a mutual thing. I don't think it was.
I'm pretty sure because, I don't know. I think after all that, you heard all the things about the last season of Game of Thrones, right?
Yeah.
I think they were just I don't know. I think they just got tired of writing, to be honest.
Okay, well that brings a fair point because I think
they want. I think they just wanted a break.
I think it was mostly Lucasfilm and their decision and Disney to let them go, but it does bring up a fair point that they probably weren't that upset about it because for one, they were probably they knew what kind of backlash they could be getting into with creating this sort of property. And they were just coming off the shit with Game of Thrones and getting backlash for that. And also, they didn't really have to worry about it because they have this big deal with Netflix. Now, the reason I don't think, you were saying Netflix offered them more money, but there's contracts, right? So because the Star Wars thing came first before the Netflix deal. So if they're contracted with Lucasfilm to make these movies, they can't just go and be like, hey, we're going to make these films with Netflix now instead. Or we're going to, because they offered some more money, they would get sued and the whole thing.
Unless they have pretty good lawyers.
Against the mouse?
You never know.
I can't see that. But I think it was more Lucasfilm's decision, but I do think, like you mentioned, I think it was a little bit mutual. I think probably Lucasfilm initiated the split. And who knows? Maybe they were originally promised this series of films, and they were wanting to do that. And Lucasfilm was like, "Hey, we've made this decision that we only want you to write this one film instead." And then they were like, "Well, we don't really want to just make one film, you know." And then they kind of parted ways from there. That would make sense to me too.
But not well. Too, it also came out in reports shortly after that the films that they were working on were supposed to be Old Republic or not necessarily the Old Republic storyline, but in that time period. Okay. It was also announced, or not announced, but it was a rumor, and we haven't heard any more about that. There was a female writer. I can't remember. I'm trying to think. I know it was something that I had read about, but she was kind of well known, and she was hired to adapt the Knights of the Old Republic video game into a trilogy
with Darth Revan and all of that. I don't know if that was ever real because it was never announced by anybody like in Disney, and we haven't heard it. You don't want to see that?
I think it wouldn't work out.
I think there would be too high of expectations.
That's pretty much it. Why it wouldn't work out, especially with those like the history of like there hasn't been a good video game movie.
Right.
Kevin Feige was brought in, and it was announced that he was going to make and produce a film for Star Wars, and they made a kind of a big deal about it. And we haven't really found any more information about that, other than he said that he had an actor in mind that he wanted to be in the film.
Some people call all these Marvel people.
Yeah, I don't know. Do you think it's somebody from Marvel that he has in mind?
I mean, at this point, like, who hasn't been in a Marvel movie? Just think about it.
I mean, that's true.
I mean, it's like, well, I don't think he's gonna call Robert Downey Jr. I think Robert Downey's gonna be like, man, I'm too old for that shit.
I don't know, man. After Doolittle, yeah. He might be ready to jump back into the.
I don't know. It's just like my thing with Kevin Feige. Like, I guess it's like I am excited about it because he has created a product that we as the audience or casual or big fans, no matter what you are, we trust the product. We see Marvel Studios, we know where we're going to get.
Right.
But it doesn't mean that success can translate to your other properties.
It doesn't, no.
It doesn't, like, come on, Mickey, like, where are you going to call, like, going down the contacts and win, like, good old reliable Kevin?
I'm excited for it overall because I think that he could do something really special with Star Wars. But the thing is, when he was first announced, and even before that, people were talking about him, like, taking over and filling the Kathleen Kennedy position after she steps down.
That's going to happen, man.
No, it's definitely not going to happen. Not now, because he just got a higher position at Marvel than he already had.
The dude is basically like chief master or whatever the title is.
Yeah, he's only going to move up. If he moves up, he's going to move up in the chain at Disney. I feel like in their film division.
Since he has his hands on the Fantastic Four and the X-Men now.
Yeah, I mean, he's over all of Marvel, like, period, like comics and everything now. Like, he's over everything. And I'm actually kind of, like, I'm really surprised about this whole Star Wars situation because he has so much that he is doing. I don't think that he's going to be as involved as some people might think, but I do think his name is going to be on it, and it's going to give people, like, some hope. I do think movies that he's making is probably the one that's coming out in 2020. Is it 20? Yeah, it's 2022. That's when the next Star Wars film's coming out, December 2022. And I think it will be the produced film by Kevin Feige. And I think it's going to be a female director. But that's my only predictions right now about that. Which that leads me to a rumor that I read today, right? And did you read a Star Wars rumor today? Do you know what I'm talking about?
This is the one about, like, 400 years before the current timeline.
Yes. So it's supposed to be in the High Republic era, not necessarily the Old Republic, the High Republic, whatever that means, and it's supposed to be 400 years before Phantom Menace. And it's supposed to feature Yoda as a younger Jedi, and it's not going to be a trilogy, but it's going to be a series of films. I got to be honest, all of that sounds good to me. I'm down for it.
And I want the young Yoda now. Back before the gray hair, before the flames.
Yeah, he would be like about 500 if.
Wouldn't that be like probably like his 30s or 40s, something like that?
Probably. I mean, they age differently, so who knows? But that's what I'm assuming, that he'd be like a 30-year-old Yoda.
But yeah, like, so if we do get the High Republic movie, if that happens, I'll be excited for it. Especially if Kevin Feige's producing it. I want it to look more like the prequels, but with the tones and stuff that we get with these new movies. And I kind of wanted to see some of that in the sequels when we didn't get it. But I don't know who's going to be directing it, who's going to be coming on. I do think Taika Waititi will direct a Star Wars film at some point. Look what he just did with the finale of Mandalorian. He's in the Disney family. But it's not going to be the film that comes out in 2022 because he's got Thor Love and Thunder in 2021. So there's no way that he would get that done quick enough.
He has his own screenplays that he wants to make.
Right. He's gonna write his own Star Wars film if he makes it too, I think. Who else here? I want to talk about this too. Bob Iger and Alan Horn keep talking about how the Disney Plus shows could become movies.
No. Don't. If it ain't broke.
It's so frustrating. Like, it makes no sense why you would try to turn something like The Mandalorian into a movie when it's perfectly fine as a show. You put it as a show, stick with it. I don't want to see, and why would I want to do that? Like, okay, I have like a show, a miniseries, or not a miniseries, or even a miniseries like Obi-Wan, but talking about The Mandalorian here, where you have a whole season that I can focus on this character, but you're telling me I can go pay whatever amount to go see it in theaters for an hour to a couple hours, a shorter story. It just, like, you could just do that as a show. And when they say things like this, like I said, I know it's a business, it makes sense from their point, but as a fan, this isn't something that can help the story and move the story forward. It's just about money, and that makes me uninterested.
For me, you know how much I talk about money, if Star Wars does this and that. Like, me and you can see where he's coming from.
Right.
But for me, if I was him for the long term, I want to do it. If this was like, I don't know, like something risky and something like, if I'm stuck like in a Logan kind of Deadpool situation, maybe I'll crank one on Disney Plus, then see how that does, then probably the next one I'll release in the theater. If I like for like.
You're talking about like a risky story, like an offshoot type story like that?
Yeah, something risky, like.
Yeah.
Like something like, I'm just like, something that's kind of like, not from the fans, but like on the business perspective, I'm stuck 50-50. I'll see on Disney Plus first, and from there, I'll see like, okay, this is doing really well. The next one we'll have in theater. Not the sequel, but a new fresh new one.
Yeah.
Or like,
and that makes sense as far as like the tone and different. I guess, I don't know. It just depends on the certain situation. It's just like when they're talking about it now, all I keep thinking about is The Mandalorian. And I'm like, I don't need anything to do with The Mandalorian. Well, not necessarily that, but anything to do with like the main context of the show being into a continuation in a film, right? Like, if I was to see Baby Yoda in a film later, way down the line, I think that would be interesting. I would like that because it would be continuation, but he would be a part of a new story. I don't want to see the same story in a different media form.
It's just like, the plus is like, you have a galaxy to play around with.
Yeah.
You can create planets if you want to at this point. Like, it's just like, we're done with the Skywalkers. Like, you have a, a galaxy to explore.
Yeah.
Like, you have stories, like, that have been mentioned and probably yet haven't been, like, explored to its fullest. Like, you can, like, right now, about the Mandalorians and stuff, you can explore the Jedi Mandalorian War if you wanted to. You can, that itself, you can, like, either, like, looking back on it, it will work more as a TV show or as a movie. Like, there's, like, literally a lot of things to explore.
There
Like,
is, you know,
they can make,
an
like,
infinite amount of things to explore and time periods to explore.
that too. Like, go back in time. Hell, go, like, 10 years ahead, 10,000 years ahead of the current timeline. Like, do whatever. You have a big, giant galaxy. It's like, this is not Marvel. This is not DC. You have nothing to, like, go back off. Like, you can just, like, go fucking nuts. Like, I mean, this is Star Wars. You can go risk. You don't have to play it. Like, don't play it safe. Just go ahead, do whatever. Fuck it. You have a bad idea, apply it. You never know. Might actually turn out to be really good.
Yeah. I mean, there was, Guillermo del Toro wanted to make that Jabba the Hutt gangster film. I think that would have been really interesting.
I would have. You never know. That probably would have worked.
If I was in charge, the stories that I would want to tell, I don't know how much I want to say this too, because I would love to make these films one day. But I would go back to the very beginning and start with, like, the beginning of the Jedi, work your way through that. That's the whole. It could be a whole trilogy right there. Is the beginning of the Jedi. Then work your way into the Gray Jedi. That could be a whole nother trilogy. Then you work your way into the Sith. Like, there's so much you could, like, progression you could do in storytelling and different trilogies you could tell with unlimited directors. Like, talent you could get, different like, there's so many possibilities with this franchise.
Like, well, for me, I'm just gonna throw my ideas in because these are ideas that I think that they're thrown out. If they get taken, well, like I already said, the Jedi and the Mandalorian War. That's one right there. Um, you know what? I would see, like, just like one, just a one-time deal kind of thing. One season, that's it. 6 episodes. Like, I want to see Order 66 from the perspective of the Clone Troopers.
Mm-hmm. I mean, and that would be a great miniseries on Disney Plus.
Yeah, just one-time deal. That's it. Like, what else? Count Dooku.
Yeah. And, some of
Younger
these I'd be fine with a Disney Plus show, and some of these too that I'd be fine with. And I think this is something else to do with Bob Iger. He said there would never be a Star Wars film airing on Disney Plus. Like, it would only be shows. And I think that was a mistake, because these Star Wars stories, like Solo and whatnot, you can make films like that and put it on Disney Plus instead of having to market and put it in theaters. You can make those films be a much smaller budget. You could be a smaller budget than a miniseries would be. But look at how all these different possibilities. Like you said, Dooku. That would be an interesting story. A Qui-Gon and Dooku movie when they were Master and Apprentice. Like, that's stuff that I would really like to see on film. Which we might see young Yoda in this High Republic series if that's happening. But a movie about a young Yoda, a Seven Samurai type Star Wars film, that would be interesting. I think I mentioned it to you before. I'd like to see a Mace Windu show in the style of Apocalypse Now.
A Kira Mall show, I'd like to see that. You could do a Lando show how he gets Cloud City. I think that might be in a comic book already, though, so they probably wouldn't do that. But there's a lot of possibilities, and not just characters we already know, but I do think there's a lot of characters that we already know that you could still expand upon and make some good stories. Palpatine, for another example. Now, I'm not talking about Palpatine and Rise of Skywalker, but let's go back to before Phantom Menace.
On that Star Wars tender.
Let's see the story of Palpatine and Plagueis. Put that in a miniseries. That would have been awesome. Get Tom Hiddleston to play Palpatine.
Oh my god.
Get Tom Hiddleston to play Palpatine. Get Benedict Cumberbatch to play Darth Plagueis, or voice Darth Plagueis.
Do you want to see a Porgs movie, right? Porgs and Ewoks.
Oh yeah.
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 Jar Jar.
You know, I would like to see some Gungans again, too. Not necessarily Jar Jar, but just Gungans around in the galaxy. I think
That's gonna take some time when me and you have kids in order for everyone to forgive the Gungan.
I mean, come on, it's part of the galaxy. Let's it is what it is.
You're right. It is what it is.
Um,
Man, this life is so tragic. Though.
And also, the one thing I want to talk about here too is Kathleen Kennedy. Go back to that one more time. Do you think that she's done after this film, Rise of Skywalker?
Look, if this movie doesn't at least make $1 billion by next month, Mickey Mouse is gonna have a talk with her.
I think Rise of Skywalker will make $1 billion.
I mean, it will, but if it doesn't make it by next month, Mickey Mouse is gonna have a talk with her.
I think they're already going to have a talk because this movie is not critically well received. It made a lot of money, and like that's the most important thing to them. But if you look at just this what's happened with Lucasfilm moving this far, and then this movie not being the success that it should have been. Because imagine if everyone loved this film, right? It would have made a lot. Like, look at Force Awakens. I know The Force Awakens was sort of a different story too, because you got to look. That was the first film that and this came out since the prequels, and it was taking us back with these original characters we hadn't seen since '83. So it was going to make more money than any of the films following, but still no excuse. I mean, this is the last film in the Skywalker saga, so that has to be taken into consideration. And I really think that somebody, and I'm not sure who it is, like I had my notes here, who do you think is going to be in charge? But I think somebody's going to end up taking over before the next Star Wars film comes out.
Dave Filoni.
I don't think it's going to be
Happy
Dave.
Hogan.
I don't think it's going to be Dave Filoni, and I don't want it to be Dave Filoni. He's incredible at coming up with ideas and being like a storyteller in Star Wars. I want him to stay and continue doing that. But
Happy Hogan.
You look at his, his episodes and Mandalorian, and they're not too great. The first episode's pretty good. The fifth episode's, and I just don't think they're going to give somebody like Dave Filoni where he is in terms of the ranking of Star Wars and whatnot. I don't think they're going to give him that position. Jon Favreau is very interesting. The reason I think it is possible that Kathleen Kennedy stays on, but she starts taking on a different role, and they give Jon Favreau the creative reins to Star Wars, which is what I actually would like to see. Because I don't think Favreau is going to be taking like a Lucasfilm type position, because he's doing his own shit, right? Like he's making his own original movies and all this, or remakes, Lion King, whatever. He's making that stuff, so I don't think he wants to like dedicate his whole career to Star Wars, but I think that he would be a good choice to run it creatively.
I'll probably bring someone we won't see coming, but in a good kind of way.
Let's hope so.
Do you have any more thoughts you want to add to this before we wrap it up?
All right. You have a galaxy to play around with. Stop staying in the same fucking shopping mall. Or like you just spot those people that you go to school with. Like go to other places, explore, fuck shit up, but with good intentions. Hire people that give a shit. Hire people that have creative minds. Take chances on people, to be honest.
But I want to add to this real quick too. I know we discussed, and I can't remember in what video or not, but we discussed like the whole planet thing, right? And they keep going to, they don't really, in these new series of films and stuff, they haven't went back to much films that we've seen in past films. Like they don't go back to much of the original trilogy films, and they go to none of the prequel films other than Mustafar and Rogue One. So why? Why are you avoiding these planets that we know are there? And why are you making new planets that are just rip-offs of those other planets? If you're going to make new planets, I want to see new, fresh planets that are different than other planets I've already seen in the series. I don't want to just you make a new planet for the sake of making a new planet. I want it to be a reason behind it. And the galaxy is big, and I do want to see them explore more things. But my question is too, I wonder how big is this galaxy and how many planets are in this galaxy, because we keep getting more and more, and I don't know.
Or galaxy.
Because from what we know right now, right, it's only one galaxy. It's not. You get beyond because it's in a galaxy long time ago and a far away. I don't know. It's big, but I don't want to say that it's like so big that there's an infinite number of planets that they can keep going to within this story.
Go crazy. Make 100 planets.
I don't know. I mean, as long as it's good, I'm not going to complain. But when they make films like The Rise of Skywalker and this new trilogy, and you keep going back, you keep making new planets just for the sake of new planets, like Jakku. I don't really know why Jakku was ever made, but here we are.
I don't know. We won't probably have a novel about it.
I'm sure we'll have a novel. We'll probably get a comic book series too.
Comic book series gonna have like some director going like, yeah, this is what he meant to say to her.
Dude, I'm so tired of hearing about Finn on Twitter and how he was, trying to tell people he was force sensitive, trying to tell Rey he was force sensitive. Like, you didn't fucking show me in the movie. I don't want to hear about it anymore. Like, that would have been something really cool to explore in the films, and you didn't do it. Don't try to. It's like a whole. Goes back to the J.K. Rowling, right, from Harry Potter, and like how she keeps coming out fucking years later and saying all this new stuff was in Harry Potter. It's like, why didn't you show that or why didn't you put that in your books? Why didn't you show that in the movies? I don't want to hear about it now. It's not there.
And also, like, if you like already knew Finn was gonna be force sensitive, why in the fuck didn't you show like at least one tiny little glimpse in Force Awakens? Then from there, you could have just built off from it.
He had a lightsaber, dude. That was your hint. He had a lightsaber.
Yeah, you're not the lightsaber in the closet, but like, am I force sensitive? No.
I don't know. It's all stupid explaining and just really. And also, it makes me wonder too. Like John Boyega, he put out that picture on Instagram while they were filming Rise of Skywalker of his hands, and I can't remember what the quote was, but people were speculating then that he was going to be force sensitive because there was a picture of his hands. So I think somebody told him, "Hey, you're going to be force sensitive," but I think they might have left out the fact that we're not going to show it in the movie though.
Yeah, it was like, oh shit, really, mate?
I don't know. I came up with this idea today too that I was thinking about. Is for another, because obviously they're not going to do a Finn show because John Boyega's not going to do it. But I think that you could do a Finn movie at some point and explore that. You could have him as the main character, and you could explore this whole force sensitive aspect. Kind of talk about what Rey's doing, but you don't actually have to have her in the film. You can have Jaina come in, be a part of this. You could have Lando in the film if they make it soon enough, because Billy D. Williams is getting up there in age. But I think there's some interesting things you could do with a Finn movie. I don't think Poe's going to be there because I think Oscar Isaac he's done.
I mean, have you seen his press interview?
He's done. And I don't blame him. I hope he goes and gets much success doing different things. I watched Inside Llewyn Davis again yesterday, and it's still amazing.
I mean,
But I'm gonna go
you
ahead
do
and
Star, you do Star Wars, you expect something great, which he did get some good stuff out of it. But man, dude, like, I mean, you can see where he's coming from. You're in a big property. You expect to go further in your career. Not saying that he's in a low point of his career, which I think right now he's in a good point of his career. But it's just like, long story short, they did my boy wrong. They did him wrong.
I mean, yeah,
They did his character wrong.
I still don't mind his storyline in The Last Jedi. I think it was
Oh, me
definitely
neither.
better than Finn's.
Me neither. But it was just my thing is like he was a spies runner. Like I want to know more about that.
I think that was stupid too, and I'm not going to say it goes against canon because we don't know anything. I don't think we really know anything about him in canon as far as like what his past was, other than his parents were part of the rebellion and they were like pilots.
There was also a
And,
thing
but there's a lot of stuff too
Poe.
with what?
There was also a thing that Poe was like being born in Yavin 4.
Yes.
But I think that was because Oscar Isaac requested that because I think the film, the Yavin 4 scenes like in his home country,
Yeah,
Guatemala.
that's true. Yeah.
I don't know, man. There's a big giant dust and fire. Um, Look, Star Wars is just like the Dallas Cowboys. They is living off past glories, man.
Might be true. I hope that it changes soon though, and I hope we take it in a new direction, some fresh ideas, while still keeping that Star Wars feel there, respecting the past, but creating a new future.